Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 and their friends tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is Colonel Retired David Taylor. As a 1986 graduate of the Citadel, Dave served with many classmates during his 24 years of service. We'll hear about Dave's time as an Olympic-level infantry scout platoon leader, his transition to armor, and his time as a combatant command CG's speechwriter. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants, not of West Point, the Army, or any government organization, most particularly the United States Space Command. Dave Taylor, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So for the kids at home, when I was in S2 at the 27 Infantry Battalion at Fort Stewart, Georgia, Dave was the scout platoon leader. We were the S2 scout platoon team. And I think in Olympic history, still considered America's dream team of S2 scouts. So this one is memory lane. Now, why this is new territory and why this S2 scout team is branching out is that Dave is a graduate of the Citadel, class of 1986. I saw online that you went to the 35th reunion down there. So well done, you. And so Dave is as adjunct a member of this class as possible because literally, if you showed up at one of our reunions, everyone would just assume you were like one of our classmates. We've all served with you in some capacity.
Yeah, I have enough bad juju on most of you guys.
Which is basically,
I lived with you guys for so many years.
We're doing this because otherwise Dave's going to go public on it all. So Dave, you're in Charleston, South Carolina right now.
That's right. Yeah, live in Charleston.
Why did you choose Charleston as a place to end up? Yeah,
so I think it all comes down to why did I go to the Citadel, right? So believe it or not, I was scheduled to be play basketball at West Point, but my SATs wasn't high enough. So I was going to walk on down to the Citadel. And my uncle was a Citadel grad, class of 1969, ended up being the Commandant of Cadets and the Chief of Staff, and then he ran a leadership directorate there. He had me drink the Kool-Aid like when I was probably a freshman in high school. When it came down to selection of schools, I know I wanted to go to a military school. I'd gotten accepted. My dad was in the Army, so moved around a lot. Had my senior year up in the D.C. area. So
now you say your dad was in the Army like he was a supply sergeant in Yakima, Washington.
Right.
So he might have been a little more senior than that.
He was, yeah. He did. He was a West Point class of 1961 graduate. Yep, still alive. Retired out in outside the Joint Base Lewis McChord. Still interacts with the Army on a weekly basis, mentors company and battalion commander still there at Fort Lewis there. So, So we moved around, got accepted to a whole bunch of schools in Virginia, including Virginia Tech and VMI.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. And they both have Corps cadets. Texas A&M, University of Texas, and then there's some other Virginia schools, University of Virginia, got accepted there, and then James Madison, and then got accepted to Citadel. Went and visited most of those schools during my first semester or senior year in high school, stayed at VMI, stayed at Virginia Tech. The VMI experience was not great. It's like the upperclassmen there were like, couldn't wait to start hazing you.
Right. Not really understanding that you have to kind of put on a good face up front.
Right. But again, I have a lot of good friends that go there, totally respect the school. Some of my best friends in the Army are VMI.
Well, Lee Wimbish, our mutual friend, went to VMI.
I love Lee. Yeah.
Explains a lot.
Yeah, they're all wild players. We all sort of come to the same ilk where we were abused in some way or shape or form, but it was all good.
But your uncle really was a kind of a steering voice in that because he was
for sure. And again, he was a colonel in the infantry. My dad was armor colonel at the time. I guess my uncle was like a major. He was in the 82nd Airborne infantry ranger guy. So, he was a big influence. But the biggest part of choosing Charleston to end up living now, but to go into the Citadel was Charleston, right?
Right.
So I went for a weekend stay there at the Citadel. Had a really good sponsor who was a freshman. They call him knobs there instead of plebes. Got him Ed Pumphrey, when the Marine Corps, as an aviator, great guy. He took me down to Charleston. We walked 2 miles into Charleston, downtown Charleston. Met up with a whole bunch of girls from the College of Charleston. Had a good time, and I
It
was like,
certainly helps put a shine on the campus, doesn't it?
yeah, it sure does. But I fell in love with the city, and I said, I want to go there. I want to go to where it's warm. I still want the military school experience, and I like warm weather, right?
My niece currently is a senior at the College of Charleston. We went down, and what a place to go to school. So I think
Yeah,
you chose wisely. Highland Falls, New York, not quite Charleston.
yeah, and Charleston is, it's an interesting city because of the history, right?
Sure.
The culture, and there's good, bad, and ugly that happened there.
Yep.
But again, I think that, the plan to move here is I was living in Michigan, was doing a job, doing acquisition for the Army, doing some science and technology work. And, I just it was cold there. People didn't smile a lot. I like to smile. I want to see the sun. And it's like, it's time to move.
Back to Charleston.
Move to Charleston. So moving to Charleston,
But you grew up as a military brat, basically, so you lived everywhere.
Yeah, I think when I eventually moved down here from Michigan, was like move 30 to include deployments and schools and all that stuff. So between running around with my dad, we went to three different high schools. Right. I think between the time I was born and the time I graduated high school, there was 12 moves there. And then the rest occurred later on. Yeah, during my career. Yep.
And that's so uncle in the mill. What is the mill? Was your dad and your uncle the first ones, or was this a family thing that went back as part of the?
Yeah. So my dad is I'm third generation. My dad's dad was colonel in the infantry during World War II.
Oh wow!
And believe it or not, he was in the Civilian Conservation Corps out in Colorado before World War II. And my dad was born a couple years before World War II. And so that's where that all started. And my dad moved all over the place. I think the longest place that he lived was down in Panama. That's where after World War II, my grandfather was stationed there. And then my grandfather, he retired as a colonel. He was like the garrison commander for Fort Sam Houston down in San Antonio. Yeah, so he retired out of there. Yeah.
A basketball standout in high school. Obviously, if you're being recruited for basketball, what was your position? What was the deal there? You're a tall drink of water, that's for sure.
Yeah, so 6'4.5" or so. Could dunk the basketball. Was not a high scorer, right? Like 10 points a game.
Yeah.
Really good rebounder, good foul shooter, great defender, and pretty quick and tenacious. Right, so mediocre in talent, but attitude and hustle, that was who I was. And then a great passer, right? They say a great passer, and had every year in high school I started. Like my freshman year, I was in Germany. We had a team there. In sophomore, I was in Newport, Rhode Island, and then started there as a forward, and then went to Woodbridge Senior High School in Woodbridge, Virginia, and started both years, junior, senior there. So, had a lot of fun, learned a lot, but mediocre. Couldn't get a full ride scholarship. Got some partial scholarships. Couldn't get it, but ended up at the Citadel. Was going to walk on, and then the Army said, "We're going to give you a scholarship." Okay. Then I started just focusing on enjoying the Citadel experience, and then focusing on academics and having fun.
Now, for those of us who didn't go through the Citadel or other ROTC programs, how did that work? You showed up to the Citadel as a student, and then you had to earn a scholarship, or how did that work?
Right. Yeah. So they had 4-year scholarships were fairly rare. I mean, this is all back in the Reagan years when the Army was still large before the Cold War ended and all that. So there was immense amount of scholarships, not a lot of 4-year scholarships. So I didn't get a 4-year scholarship. But my first year, they said you're gonna get a 3.5-year scholarship. So competed for that, and I said this is great. Majored in political science, a lot of pre-law. I thought I was going to want to be a lawyer, and then ended up going up. Just want to be a soldier, and then do business afterwards, right?
And how that scholarship you all competed for it? Because there are students that go to the Citadel, obviously, that don't go into the military, so they go on to other.
Right. Yeah. I think right now there's like less than 50%. I think it's been like that for a while. I think my class, we had like 450 who graduated. I think less than half went in to the military, and then all services were represented there. So the Marine Corps had a program, was part of the Navy Department of Naval Science. Professor, there was an aerospace studies, and then Army.
Right.
And then we had veteran students and all that. So I'd say a little bit less than 50% of people went in to the military, and probably out of that, probably 75% went active. The other ones went reserve and National Guard. And then other people just, they went to the school. Either their parents wanted them to go there. It's become a really fantastic leadership school.
Sure.
A lot of the programs they have, again, even tonight, I'm going to a mentorship program where I mentor cadets. They really didn't have that when I was there. And so a lot of focus on leadership and giving back to the community, which I think has grown significantly at the school.
Well, lifetime of service, we call it, right? Which is, if you give back to your community, you're serving as well. It's great. Right. And now your experience that you got the scholarship, which shaped your experience as a cadet there, because you then were doing a lot of extra duties. What was that like? Did you guys you do trainings and with your ROTC?
Yeah, we did. We did our ROTC class. We did typical events in the summertime. I was fortunate between my freshman and between my sophomore and junior year to be able to go to airborne school. Went with a whole bunch of West Point cadets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fort Benning, now Fort Moore. Had a great time there.
Oh, we were probably there at the same time at airborne school. Yeah.
Yep. So went there, and then the capstone event for ROTC cadets was always used to be called like advanced camp or leadership assessment between junior and senior year. So I went there again, had fun. The ROTC part was good. The cadet corps had its own events, a lot of intramural sports, a lot of extracurricular activities. That was a lot of fun. I love the Citadel. I excelled there because I had a great time, and I love my classmates. I mean,
good for you, man.
They made it all fun, and I had Charleston surrounded me. We could go to the beach, not often, but on the weekends. Didn't have a great football team, but I think all of us in military schools sort of go through the roller coaster of that.
Yeah, right. But I think in the long view of history, having a town like Charleston outside the gate's not a terrible thing. I think part of our absolute rivalry with Navy is they've got a fantastic town and we don't. So that's why we're so angry all the time.
I remember, one time in our first unit, we had an OPD there in Charleston to see the Citadel Navy game. Yeah, and Citadel beat them like at the last second on a field goal, and so you guys were going crazy.
Yeah,
you saw the midshipmen go down again,
right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Right. How did it work? You got to Fort Stewart, Georgia, 24th Infantry. That's where we served together. Yep. And we had a whole kind of funny way that we got assignments based on our class rank. How did it work coming out of ROTC? And like, was that considered a prestigious assignment towards Stewart? Was it something you went for, or how did that work? What did it look like from your perspective?
Yeah, so I wanted to stay in the Southeast, just to stay close to the school and stay close to friends there. So the way things happened in ROTC, we were the first thing you want to do, you want to get it high. Obviously, there's an order of merit list. I was fortunate during like a lot of my leadership assessments and the leadership camp, went to Fort Bragg, now called Camp Liberty, between my junior and senior year, and got like what's called the Area Commander's Award. So I scored the highest out of the leadership and all the tasks that were there. So I was fortunate to be highly ranked. And by getting highly ranked, you're in ROTC. The biggest thing is you weren't guaranteed, but high probability you'll get the branch you wanted. And then for us, because of you wanted to get regular Army. So that was the two things that I wanted. And then I wanted to be like an airborne ranger and jump out of airplanes. So I want like my first choice was the 82nd Airborne. Nope. Um, then it was like Fort Campbell, 101st. Nope, didn't get there. Then like try to get like Fort Carson, Fort Lewis, and Hawaii, but no, I got Fort Stewart.
Okay.
I was happy with it. Definitely ready to go mechanized infantry. And once I commissioned on the 17th of May, 1986, it was time to go to Fort Benning.
Yep.
2 weeks later, started what was then called Infantry Officer Basic Course. Went through that, then sort of moonlighted for a couple of weeks, then went to Ranger School. And and then after Ranger School, October to December of 86, and then I reported like right before Christmas of 86. A guy named, I remember the staff duty officer was a guy named Lieutenant Ron Vogel. Remember he signed in, hey, I'm Lieutenant Taylor here to, he's like, come back on this day and the S1 will, sign you in or whatever. So
I love it.
It was fun days.
I love hearing these old names. Before we dive into 221, it became 27 Infantry. Your dad was artillery. Your uncle was infantry. Your grandfather
was armor.
Armor.
That was armor.
So how did you come up with infantry out of all that familial influence? What was it about infantry that attracted you?
Yeah, I think it was. So at the Citadel, it's different now than it was back then. Obviously, there was, the military, the Department of Military Science had a lot of captains, majors, and a lot of them were graduates. But to tell you the truth, they were sort of like dorks, right?
Sure. Same way
NCOs,
West Point. So,
but the NCOs,
right.
the NCOs were like, I was like focused on them. So there was a guy named Sergeant First Class Mike Hall, and he ended up being like the SOCOM Sergeant Major, and the guy was just motivated. He was from the 1st Ranger Battalion. He was on assignment to come up to the Citadel for 2 to 3 years, and he just really influenced me. There was like a Ranger, Cordell Airborne Ranger Club. I was part of that. I did all that experience, and he was like, I'm like, I want to like lead people like him. That, and then my uncle. And then I remember when my dad called me up and said, what branch did you put in for your first choice? I said infantry. He hung up on me. So
that's fantastic.
My uncle, I thought my uncle was like, but again, fast forward 5 years after that, eventually I switched branches to armor.
Well, let's talk about we're going to talk all through. I mean, we can't pass over all the great infantry time. But you did eventually switch branches to armor. So literally the entire family is represented from your grandfather to your dad because you ended up in both branches.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Ended up.
You literally wrap the whole thing together. I mean, that's pretty astonishing thing. Like some people go from infantry to FAO or infantry to MI. You went infantry to armor.
Right. Yeah. And so all the combined arm branches were, I think, in the same office back there. And what was called First Com back then now is like
you were a combined arms human being.
Yeah. It's all the same, right? You just maneuver warfare and common sense, right?
Right. So let's go back to infantry, and you and I have to be careful because we could dive into kind of hours of stories about this unit that we served in. But Roger Carstens, who many people watching this podcast will know, our class president was in the unit. My very first day, I signed in, all nervous as you do as a second lieutenant. I walked out. They said, walk outside to the office. That was the S2 office. If you recall that building, I
remember
they made you walk. So I walked outside and I was literally walking to my car to grab my kit to go into the office, and up walks Roger Dean Carstens. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. He goes, what are you doing here? Boom, there we went. So that was literally my very first day I ran into Roger. So Roger was there. Eric Newman. We had a whole bunch of the guys from our class. So what was it like being a second lieutenant? Which company were you in at first? Were you in
I was in Bravo
Bravo.
221
Yep.
Infantry, the Gimlets, before we switched over to cotton balers. Yep.
Was that Tharp?
So my company commander was Bob Newman. He was a West Point
Newman,
grad.
right?
Came from
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Ranger Battalion. Yep. Yep.
I think he left
Um,
right early on there.
early on, yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we did, very, very fortunate. My fellow brother lieutenants, the people I still, they all live in South Carolina just like us now. So there was Scott Brown. He was the first platoon leader.
right.
He's part of Third Army. I think he's in the G3 shop. So he lives up in Sumter, South Carolina. There was Jeff Kelly was the second platoon leader, and he ended up being a logistician and was a brigade commander, logistics brigade commander in the
Really?
100. Yep, he's retired down in Hilton Head, and then Scott Fitzenreiter, who was our company XO, he ended up going to after leaving Fort Stewart, went to the 82nd, and then went to the old guard. He was the honor guard company commander there. He ended up leaving the army fairly early, I think around the 10-year mark, and so he's down in Hilton Head too. So we were all still together. We were called the Brotherhood, so we all stayed together and try
Yeah,
to
yeah. I remember
keep
Fitzenreiter was a first lieutenant, and it's so funny when you look back on it. I was like, wow, he knows so much, man. He's a first lieutenant.
right. Yeah, I remember when we all got promoted to first lieutenant at the same time. It was you, me,
Yeah,
Scott Brown, Jeff Kelly, Eric Newman, you, and then I think Wade Cook.
Wade Cook. Yeah,
Yeah, and I remember the tradition back in 221 Infantry is they line you up. The battalion commander would come and promote you, and
yeah,
then they would dump like a trash can of water on you
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we all did it
with
together,
police
right?
on it.
We all lined up because
Yeah,
we're
we
the
all got
same.
to do it. Yeah, so there's a picture of us all standing together, drenched
We're
in
so
our
drenched with,
BDUs.
because why
Yep.
not? I mean, it's just,
Right. Yeah.
that was before the whole Gatorade thing. So that's the
Right.
Army leading the way once again.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
so you were platoon leader, and then tell the story about how you wanted to go to the Ranger Battalion, and we had a colonel.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I was fortunate to be a rifle platoon leader for 18 months, and I had Bob Niven was my company commander. A guy named Steve Tharp replaced him. They both were through the Ranger Battalion, and they're like, "You need to go in the Ranger Battalion." So I did all my paperwork for all that. And then I remember wanting to go talk to George Woodward, who's our battalion commander, and he's ready to sign my 4187. He goes, "What do I have to do to get you to not go to the Ranger Battalion?" I said, "Sir, maybe the scout platoon leader, but you've already got one. You just replaced one 3 months ago." He goes, "I'm going to do it." So he tore up my 4187 and said, "You're the scout platoon leader." And at that time, the scouts were out on the range doing gunnery, and says, "You're shooting table 8 on your M3A1 tomorrow with your new crew." I was like, "Okay." So that was the life changing, where he's just like,
I
you're asked,
remember
what will
so
it take? And you
it's
just say,
very easy to get on this podcast and compliment people, but I remember the day you walked in and said, "Dude," or we didn't say "dude" back then. You said, "I'm the scout platoon leader." It was like my entire world exploded because you're a monster. You were a monster then. You were an amazing lieutenant, an amazing leader, and to have you as a scout platoon leader, I knew we were just as an S2, my day was made because we went to NTC. I had somebody on the other end of the line that was going to actually scout. The former
yeah.
scout platoon was fine. It was just like
Yeah, so,
like
yeah, so
yourself. We were going to have
it's
fun.
interesting if you look at your career, no matter how long you stay in the Army, and I ended up staying in like a little bit over 24 years, is, these decisions you have and these people that influence you, and then which path you go, right? And again, I could have just said nothing.
Let's move there. That was pretty. That was a pretty clever, and that was a smart thing to do. Is say, what can I do? Because in the end, he got an amazing scout platoon leader, and then his intelligence ISR, the kids call it now. His whole
Yep.
intel and scout section was just a machine, right?
We had great soldiers, and you just had to give them some good guidance. And the NCOs were fantastic.
Yeah, he had a good
Just like
group.
you always hear about the Army, it's like you never really had to worry about anything. Uh, as far as the soldiers being well trained, being safe, and they knew their job, they just needed to be stretched in scenarios, and then
Sure.
put out the training all the time, right? And so that's that's what leaders' jobs are, to do that, is to put them in those situations and go out and train a lot.
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
were fortunate that I got to do a lot of that.
So you
Either
and we're gonna talk about our rotation. You and I did a rotation, only one rotation as the S2 Scout Platoon, but you and I actually went out to um, the NTC to do a little scouting mission, and I'm going to actually put the picture up here, and it will people can see that we're here on a Humvee that looks like some sort of BRDM, which was a Soviet-styled vehicle of the time. I'm on the left. Dave's in the middle, and on the right is Buddy Carmen, who was ended up being a good friend of all of ours, but he was stationed out there. So
yeah,
how did we end up rigging that up? Because I can't remember how we were.
yeah. So
Where you and I were out there at the same time.
yeah, so 2 times during my tenure in the Gimlet/Cotton Balers, I got the opportunity to go out to support the we call the Op4 opposing force augmentation rotation, right? So went with Charlie Company 221, my platoon did, because they wanted more infantry there, and Charlie Company didn't have enough infantry, so my platoon was told to go augment Charlie Company, and that was a great experience. That was in
Oh, so you did a rotation as infantry.
early '87. Yep. So where I met Buddy Carmen for the first time, and he was on a T-72 tank.
Yeah.
416 Tango. I remember that dug in my infantry platoon right in front of them. We were fighting against the Second Army.
416 Tango, right? I remember.
Yeah. And then we did the same thing. Bravo 27 got to go out there to opt for augmentee, and then they needed more help, so brought the scouts out there. And I told I said, hey, you should come out. And then let's make sure Bravo Company takes the scout platoons and doesn't use us for infantry, and let us go out and ride around with the Op4 scouts. And that's exactly what we did.
They gave us the uniforms and the whole bit.
Yep,
and they were actually really, it was a smart thing to let the 2 shop go out there and hang out with the Op4, because we got to know them very well. And but you see that picture there, we're actually wearing the uniforms, and you'd actually been down there a little bit longer than I had. So I remember, I actually tell the story. We were going out on that silly fake BRDM, and then you and Buddy knew every bump in the road, and I was in the back and thrown all over the place because, I was a thinker, not a fighter, Dave.
Yeah, every little place at the NTC, has like like a name for it. We were going down the Yellow Brick Road, and I remember being that BRDM and just being in some treacherous places with Buddy Carmen and his guys.
Well, they knew every inch of that place. So Dave Baum, Jim Nicholas, Mark Wolf, these are all classmates of mine that were out there. So while you were out there, I was hanging out with Dave Baum, who was on the infantry side, and had a chance to connect with him. And he's in by Fort Moore now, and still a close friend. What? So let's talk about the greatest moment ever. And this is specifically for Jay Millen, who was out there, Dave Baum, Jim Nicholas, Buddy Carmen. Let's talk about the dismounted exploit. We got to tell that story, because you literally became a maneuver element in and of your own right. So talk about that story.
What was that? The day 14, the rotation story?
Yeah, when you set up the line behind them.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, I mean, so I learned a lot from riding around with Buddy Carmen and the Op4, and it's like, for you and the battalion to be successful, I had to be successful in like making sure my scouts got in the right place, to be able to see the key area, the decisive action of the battlefield, which typically you would tell me where I need to be to do that. And sometimes we were a scout platoon that had 6 cavalry fighting vehicles, M3A1s, that were relatively loud for scout vehicles and large for scout vehicles. So we dismounted a lot, right? So we dismounted. I was fortunate to have some really good scouts, some new scouts that were infantry that liked to walk with heavy rucksacks, and I could give them places to go on the map. Although they were specialists in E5s, they would get there and then they'd be able to report back to me and you what was going on.
Yeah.
So last battle, day 14 on the western side, there's a place called Crash Hill. The Op4 was defending back there, and then there's a place called Alligator. And I remember you came out, I think, on Log Pack and said we didn't have a lot of prep time. We had done a day 13 mission, so we didn't have a lot of time to reset. It's like, this is day 14. You're going to go hit the second echelon defense. You told me where there was. I'm like, I am going to sneak my scout platoon in there. And we did. We went down a Wadi. It was me, and I was dismounted with 3 other scouts, and we were walking in front of this Wadi, checking for T-72s and BMPs, the counter recon screen. We fought through that, got into the second echelon defense, and just walked real quietly through minefields, through barbed wire, and we got back behind the Op 4 second echelon defense. I really didn't realize exactly what was going on. But the AT-5 reserve of like 9 AT-5s came right in front of us. We had a firing line or battle position, and we just waxed all of them. And then the Op 4 sent like a motorized rifle company after me, and then killed all of us.
Well,
that's how it ended. Yeah, but we just walked
remember
through.
That after action review, they had that old computer generated image, and it showed the map, and the scout platoon was here, and everyone just went, "What?"
He told me to infiltrate. So it was the Bradleys were quiet if you didn't accelerate. So if you just put them in the drive, they would creep, and we just creep forward. We lost my platoon sergeant Bradley. We did get hit by Op 4 T-72. They eventually, I think Buddy Carmen finally figured it out, and they were roaming around.
He figured out you walked past him.
Yeah, they had searchlights on their tank, and they took out the platoon sergeant. But the other 5 Bradleys made it back.
Now, it was after that unit that you went armor. So what was the decision to switch branches? Talk about that after your success as a scout platoon leader in
I think it was the love of being a scout, to be out in front with soldiers, mostly at night, sneaking around, maintaining contact with the enemy. I love that. I felt like this is like I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And that was probably more so the reason why I'm like, I want to switch, because I want to do armor cav. I want to do cav stuff. It's like this is what my heart is. So went back to battalion commander. Said, I want to switch branches. Had to get a whole bunch of armor folks from the armor battalion, my brigade commander, to sort of weigh in the branch, and branch just moved my file from.
But if you think about how amazing that is, you just said, "Hey, I want to go switch," and then there was a mechanism for you to say, "Oh, okay."
I think most of the time with the army, you just like the army's going to do whatever it wants with you unless you ask, right? And and then I had a lot of leaders that supported me, and then they were willing to write a small note or letter to justify my packet, and that's what made it successful. I think that spring is our scout platoon got to augment 2-4 Cav to be the Op 4 for the 24th Infantry Division. And so I spent the whole time with Lieutenant Colonel and Glenn Pope, the commander of 2-4 Cav, and my scout platoon was augmented to them because they had like 2 ground troops of just Bradleys, and they needed some more. Yep. So got to do that. And then right at the 18-month, I was a rifle platoon leader for 18 months, very fortunate. 18 months as a scout platoon leader, then became the HHC 27 Infantry XO. And so me and Spoon Newman, so Eric was the support platoon leader. We had an office down in the motor pool. He had like 40-year-old trucks he was trying to maintain. And then we deployed.
Which were more capable than his RX-7, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah. His RX-7.
Sorry, Spoon, if you're watching.
Yeah. And then so we went to we deployed to Desert Shield.
Yeah.
Right. And then when I got there, the battalion commander for 27 Infantry was like, "Hey, your armor in this other battalion is short platoon or short lieutenants." I was still a lieutenant.
Huh.
Right.
Right. Like, we were when we went over, right?
Yeah. It's like I got promoted to captain at the 4.5-year mark back in the day. Right. All that happened sooner now. Right. So I've been a infantry platoon leader 18 months, scout platoon 18 months, an HACXO through an NTC rotation. And it's funny, we went to our battalion went with the 48th Brigade, Georgia National Guard, to NTC rotation in July of 90. I was going to go to the Armor Advanced Course 2 weeks later on August 2nd, Saddam Hussein.
Right.
Right? And so all of 27 Infantry's vehicles, including all the Bradleys and all the trucks and Humvees, are on a train.
Right. We were angry when we went over to Iraq,
right,
because of geopolitics or all, just because he'd really screwed with our assignments.
Right?
Right?
But again, it's like, the other thing is like,
screw with our assignments like this. Where your Republican Guard is ours, right? Because man, I had a sweet program here. Now I'm sitting over here, right?
Yeah. So 27 Infantry was we're on block leave when Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, there's no way we're going to be going to the war. And then that was like the 28th, 29th of July.
Right.
We landed in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia on August 15th.
Right.
So all our equipment came back broke.
Yeah.
We loaded ammunition on it in the motor pool, took it to the port of Savannah. Eric was the movement officer. He loaded all the stuff on there on the ships, and we flew over. So within 2 weeks, we ended NTC rotation.
And off we went.
We're sitting in Dhahran.
From one dust bowl to another.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, how did it transpire? You transferred to the 369. What was your first job there at Desert Shield?
Lieutenant Colonel Canada, the battalion commander, said, "Come be a battle captain, because we think we'll move you to 269." So I was the night battle captain for the battalion for like 3 weeks, and
that was in the talk, kind of running all the night operations.
And then one of the tank platoons that was attached to 27 Infantry, we were cross attached, Combined Arms Task Force, had a tank platoon without a lieutenant. And so I became the tank platoon leader for Delta Company, 3rd Platoon, 369. And I stayed in that position until early December of 90. So, and then I got brought up. The battalion commander 369 had relieved a couple of captains, and they needed someone to be like the S3 So I became the S3 369 as a first lieutenant. And then on 1 January, believe it or not, my dad was still in the Army. He was stationed. He was the OPM for the Saudi Arabian National Guard.
Really?
Yep. So he was in Riyadh. He came out to the desert, and he extracted me and Spoon from the assembly area. And then we got to go, we met Schwarzkopf and all the crown prince of Saudi Arabia for like 4 or 5 days. And we had Christmas there in Riyadh.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Then came back, and then 2 weeks later we were at war. Right, the air war started. Right?
And then what was your role when it kicked off?
So I was like the S3 Air planner for the battalion, right? And so we were a pure tank battalion reserve. We had moved from 1st Brigade to 2nd Brigade, so we were in the Vanguard Brigade,
right,
under General Paul Kern. And so I was, although I had not gone to the advanced course, was responsible for doing all the battalion planning for 369. And then we had 3 GPSs in the battalion. The scout platoon leader had one, the support platoon leader had one, and I had the 3rd one.
Yeah.
So I was responsible for navigation of the battalion as well, where the frontline trace was. Yep. So
they couldn't have chosen anyone better, though. You could have just thrown the GPS away and walked in. Like
not that wind, dust, and crazy weather.
Not in that desert.
I'm glad we had it. But again, we stopped, right, because the satellites, there was this windows where it weren't working, and the GPS would stop. It would always, okay, time to refuel.
Yeah. Right. I had one as well. I don't know why. Well, we had direction finding equipment, so we had a GPS because you had to know exactly where the equipment was going, and it was like the size of a dashboard and just gave you a coordinate, so you end up having to use a map anyway. Not like your cell phone getting to Publix these days.
That's right. Yeah.
But you finished out as the S3 Air, or did you get bumped up? What was the deal? You were S3 Air in name, but you were actually the S3 of the battalion.
So I was like the assistant S3 of the battalion. Okay. Again, the battalion had a lot of leadership challenges, to say the least. There's a big fratricide incident that occurred on one of the objectives with 369 that, in many ways, I sort of foresaw. I didn't want to say I didn't manifest it, but I sort of foresaw the issue, and it sort of materialized right in front of us. So, you got a lot of the fog of war that happens, and, things go wrong. And so you learn a lot from.
Not so much covered in the glowing histories or Schwarzkopf's account of things, right?
No, it's not, right? It's not, and it's sad, right? When you see the, just some of the basic coordination stuff. And again, fog of war happens. Everyone's really super tired. People are afraid. People are hungry. People want to get home. People want to be safe. And so those things happen, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So as soon as I got at the end, I was helping Eric Newman. I was a battalion movement officer for 369. He was still doing it for 27 Infantry. So I loaded everything on the boat. I was going to stay there and go see my parents, but Branch called and said, "Do you want to go to the armor advanced course that starts in 8 days?" And I said, "Yeah." And then 8 days later, I was at the armor advanced course. At Fort Knox, Kentucky. I switched branches again into the information and space operations functional area.
Okay.
I did that right after 9/11. Right. So I had a successful battalion or regimental SRE with the 3rd ACR. Wanted to figure out what I wanted to do after the Army, and going into space and information operations allowed me to do that. And I requested to do that.
Space and information operations, the ultimate scouting opportunity. Like an infinite battle space.
It's all about information, right? Yeah.
Now but you actually went to Harvard to study these things, Harvard University.
Yeah. So after Desert Storm, after advanced course, I switched branch. I was supposed to go to Germany to sort of close out. This is post Cold War, mid 91. They were going to close down most of the divisions there. Didn't want to do that, so I switched with somebody that was there who had married a German lady, and so he got to go back to Germany, and then he was going to the OP4 at NTC, so I got to go to the OP4.
You were doing the OP4 at NTC, so you and Eric both went to the 11th ACR, right?
Yeah. Yep. We both
become the OP4.
Yep. We got to be in the OP4. Yeah, he was there a little bit less than I was. He went to go to do strategic intelligence and went off to Hawaii to join Task Force Full County. I got to stay there for 4.5 years. And then, the Army has
more terrifying than the guy who walked through their defenses and wiped out their AT-5s to now be on the other side of it. I have to imagine you tortured more poor battalions going through that rotation than anybody.
I loved it, but when the Blue 4 had their stuff together, it was a hard fight.
Yeah.
So there was some. It wasn't all W's in mine. There was some L's too. Sometimes it happens. Like, man, how they do that? And it's usually because there's all.
But not
all. They had a good scout platoon leader, a good S2, and they could synchronize artillery and aviation.
If I'd have been in Blue 4 going out there and they heard Dave Taylor was on the other side, I'd have said, "Just call this on compassionate grounds, man. I'm out."
No. You never knew. Every mission there was not like this is locked in. We had a battalion commander or a brigade commander who was, he was the G3 of 24th ID during the war, Colonel Pat Lamar.
Yeah.
He was called the Screamer, right? He's like, he demanded excellence out of all of us. And you could do your best, but sometimes, the fog of war happens on the training battlefield too.
Yeah.
And a lot of smoke in one area and the Blue 4 is behind you. And you're like, uh-oh, how'd that happen? Right.
So the 11th ACR role, was that as an armor officer prior to going to space and information?
It was. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So I got to do 2 commands there at the OP4. It was the 177th Armor Brigade to switch to 11th ACR.
Right.
Then
was that considered a company command on paper?
What's that?
When because you commanded the armor motorized rifle, or I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was a company command. Yeah, company command. Then I was a
company command on paper, but it's
like a motorized rifle battalion commander.
Battalion, right? Yeah.
Right. Yep.
The 45th Shock Battalion, or something like that. That's what I'd have named it.
We're the 2nd Motorized Rifle Battalion. We had, 10 10 T-72s, Bismods, of course, and then 43 BMPs. So it was fun. Yeah, and then then I got to go to Harvard, got the
So
degree,
when you
and
graduate, you got a master's degree from Harvard, right?
I did. Yeah, they had a
So,
good program there.
maybe West Point quibbling about your SATs might have been a mistake if I'm looking in hindsight,
Oh
right?
yeah, I actually did better at Harvard than I did at the Citadel. But I
Right.
think the
I think West
secret
Point
handshake was
1982 might have missed a trick on that one, saying, "Well, boy, that standardized test didn't work out." The guy went to Harvard.
yeah. I followed Mark Esper, right? He's a classmate of yours.
Yeah,
He had gone through the same strategist program where you go to Harvard, you get a master's degree at the Kennedy School there, you get to take classes at the business school and Tufts and MIT, and then you
right.
go in the Army staff and you work strategic planning. So that's what I did for
And unlike
18
yourself,
months.
Esper just disappeared off into the wilderness and would never to be heard from again.
He had a great reputation when he was a captain going through that program
Love
too.
Mark. Yeah, he's a stand-up guy.
Yeah.
What so what was your first assignment after that?
So after being on the Army staff, I went to CGSC, now called Intermediate Level Education at Fort Leavenworth. So I went to the resident course there. And then I went to be a squadron S3 in the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment at Fort Carson. And then we deployed as part of Stabilization Force 7 with the 49th Armored Division to Bosnia and Herzegovina in
A little bit of that.
2000,
Okay.
early 2000. Yep. So did that. And then after that, went to joint assignment at, got to stay there in Colorado Springs, joint assignment in NORAD and U.S. Space Command. Was there at 9/11 when NORAD became relevant, right? And
Really? You
on
were
that,
there at 9/11 at NORAD.
yep, yeah. I was a speechwriter for the commander in chief of NORAD and Spacecom at that
Really?
point. Yep, yeah.
What is that like? Be a speechwriter for a commander in chief? Would you just sit in an office and work on your
Yeah,
verbs
was
and
in the office
adverbs
and then
until he needs a speech? How does that work?
just doing a lot of his executive correspondence, and then he
Is that right? Yeah.
traveled a lot and entertained a lot, and so he always wanted original content, and so we
How
wrote
interesting is
speeches
that?
for him.
Kidding.
Yeah,
Did
yeah.
you enjoy
So
that?
working for high level folks like that, you learn a lot,
I
right?
bet.
You learn a lot of the executive decision making that happens at the strategic level. I remember his aide, so he was an Air Force 4-star at Eberhard, just a great American, great leader. He would be flying in his C-26 or whatever his Learjet jet would be.
Right.
He always took off and landed to get credit for the takeoffs and landings as a pilot. He was a rated pilot, right? So he did that. But the aide would call me on the sat phone, right? And I'd be, I was like in the commander's action group, maybe like, the boss needs to brief Secretary Rumsfeld tomorrow on X topic. Like, okay. I'm like, we're landing in 20 minutes. He wants to see the first draft. Right? Just some obscure. And so
It's like being a speechwriter.
but for him, it was easy. It was like, give me one card, give me bullets, no longer one sentence, and I'll talk extemporaneously off of that.
Yeah,
Just give me
right.
the
You
highlights of what I
give
want.
him the structure, and then he
The
goes
structure.
to
And then
tell.
he wanted like really good quotes when he was like public speaking, or he was entertaining. He'd always want to have something that's relevant to the day in history or something like that. So it was.
Oh, was that
It was
pre-internet?
interesting. What's that?
That wasn't pre-internet, was it? I mean, how did you find the
No,
information?
it was internet time. Yeah.
Okay, so you could use the internet.
Yeah, it's 2000, between 2000, summer 2000 and
Okay.
2003. Yeah.
Yeah, so you were able to pull. Well, that's super. What's interesting about that is your perspective was his perspective, had to be his perspective by definition, or you wouldn't have done a good job. So you're thinking at that level about what.
Yeah, you're forced to say, okay, I got to figure out what this issue is from the J5 of NORAD,
right,
and then provide him, a couple of note cards with key information and key quotes and talking points on it for him to talk to the chairman or the secretary.
Yeah, right.
And then, after 9/11, we had to go in, or he had to go in there and brief what happened on 9/11, right? So we did all the modeling and simulation of that, and what NORAD's response was.
That kept you
Right, so
busy.
he had to go in and brief the National Security Council, and we had to figure out what the timeline was, and it was
Oh wow, yeah.
trying time. And then we stood up Northcom shortly after that, to help set up a combatant command for not only protecting the United States, but also to help with support to civil authorities and natural disasters and things like that. Yeah, so that was fun. And
I
after
love
that,
it.
I went to go
That's really
be a
interesting.
professor of military science at Michigan State. So that was a fun experience. And then War College, National War College.
National
Was
work.
fortunate to get promoted to colonel. My son Maxwell got diagnosed with leukemia during my tenure there at the War College. The Army was good enough to, and I was a geographical bachelor, so my wife and son was still in Michigan.
Yeah.
I went to DC to National War College, and then it's a life changing event when your kid is sick and
Sure is.
not
Yeah.
sure what's is your kid going to live or not. Your priorities change. Um, the Army was good. They sent me to be a senior Army advisor, which I spent the last 4 years of my career working in 4 different states, sending units from the National Guard and the reserves from Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, and South Carolina to either Iraq or Afghanistan. So it was
Right.
like learning program management where the Army had restructured, building units from the scratch, getting the equipment, getting all these great citizen soldiers to mobilization centers, getting them through training, and sending them off to war. And then, not all of them came back.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then 2010, retired, decided just to call it quits and sort of establish some roots in
Yeah.
Michigan. Again, obviously that didn't end up happening. Ended up coming down here to South Carolina, where I want to
For your
spend
30th move.
for my 30th
I
move.
think
Yeah.
you've earned a little bit of stability. Now, how long you've lived there? How long have you lived in Charleston on this go?
Yeah. So moved here in 2017 and just recently moved out to Kiowa Island out here in South
So
Carolina.
does every like 8 months you look at your watch and say, "Gee, where am I moving next?" It's got to be in your.
No, don't want to do that anymore. No, I think this is it.
What an amazing career. Oh, it's Colonel David Taylor. What if you look back? Well, I'll ask you more directly. When you advise cadets at the Citadel who are thinking about 18 to 22 years old, thinking about what they want to do with their lives, and you give them advice on a career, on kind of just steer them. What are the kinds of things that you give advice for kids at that age?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and again, going to an event tonight to mentor some cadets. Last semester, there was had the privilege of mentoring 4 different cadets or students there from different programs. The business school has a mentoring program, and then the Corps for the leadership has one. So I'm in, do both. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, most of the folks that they connect me to are going in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And advice is pretty easy there. It's like, you're going to have a great time, so you got to have fun. As long as you're having fun, stay in the Army. Your journey as a leader changes. What you learn at the Citadel, what you learn in the Army from different leaders, you observe, you experience, you take in good things, you push other things off, and then try to make your own, who you are as a leader, make it your own. And then it's the how do you truly take care of people, right? There's a saying in the Army, it's like, take care of soldiers. Like, what does that really mean? And it really means going to be beyond to help them personally, but it also means to train them hard and don't let them whine, and training them so if they do go to war, they come back home to their families.
Yeah.
And so I think, that's, try to talk those three principles. And then that, someday you will leave the Army, and people will see and feel your loss, but the Army keeps rolling along. So don't fall too much in love with the Army, right?
Wise
Just enjoy
word.
it while you can, but when you know it's time to leave, it's time to leave. And I know, Paul, you had that. I think everyone goes through that.
Yeah.
And I think I think you talk to anybody who even stayed in for 35 years, at the end, there's always times where it's like, I don't know if this is right for me. And I think everyone goes through that. I said, you will have that discussion in your head. Should I stay in the Army or not? And when you do, you should reach out to mentors and people and say, this is what I want to do. What do you think?
Yep.
and have more than a couple mentors, and then make a decision off of that based on what you think in your mind and in your heart and in your gut is the right thing.
And you make a great point. The Army is a window of time that you're in it. So if you make the most of it, then you're doing okay while you're taking care of folks and doing your bit. Awesome stuff, man. What an amazing connection. We're friends for life just based on our experience and mutual friends.
And you're a South Carolinian now too. Thank goodness.
You are as adjacent to and as much an adjunct member of our class as I can informally declare you. It's been just an absolute pleasure. I'm sure there's a whole group of people going to get a kick out of hearing from you. Hey, thanks so much for being on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. And of course, you and I are going to get together real soon.
Cotton balers, by God.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and to stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe buttons. With 954 living graduates in the class, we have a lot of stories to collect, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.